First of all, we all recognize it is difficult to follow Governor Gavin Newsom in a conversation about slush funds that included the reference to knee pads. But we are going to do our best because these are very important topics too. And obviously there is so much going on in the world right now. We're going to try to cover a lot of it, but we also, the whole purpose of this forum is to talk about ideas and what to do in the future and how we move forward. So we're going to have a conversation about that too. But I want to just start with China because I think this is a topic that is on a lot of people's minds. It is always on a lot of people's minds, but certainly after the president just got back from a trip to China last week. I wanted to start with you, Secretary Blinken. You said you've done a lot of speeches. We looked at a lot of your speeches. You said if the United States is competing with China alone, we may well wind up on the losing side of the equation. Where do you think the relationship stands now? What is your assessment of that? And what is your prescription on where it really needs to go from here?
Well, thanks very much, Jen. It's great to be with everyone, be with my friends and colleagues as well. Look, I think we have a president who divides the world up into what he sees as spheres of influence. And the big countries get to do what they want in their part of the world, and the smaller countries have to suffer what they will. And that includes China. And so other than some trade issues that may affect us, his inclination is to give them free rein over their region and maybe even a little bit beyond. And I think we saw that play out. The challenge is what happens within one sphere of influence almost never stays there. And countries are always looking for more. And China is an example of that as well. This is the one country that has the capacity as well as the intent to reshape the international system in a way that advances its interests and values and probably undermines ours. I think, Jen, as we're looking at it, we have to resist trying to put it on a bumper sticker. There's no neat way of summing up what is probably the most complex and consequential relationship. We compete, for sure. We can test where we really disagree. And we have to find ways to cooperate on issues that really are in the interests of both of our peoples. But from that perspective, you've got to approach it from a position of strength. And that means making ourselves as strong as possible at home with the right investments. But it also means making ourselves as strong as possible around the world, aligning other countries, building convergence, because, to the point you made, if we're competing with China one-on-one, that's a game that we may lose. Their market's much bigger. Their manufacturing is 3 times our manufacturing. Purchasing power parity is greater than ours. More papers, more patents, a bigger navy. You can go down the list. But when we're aligned with Europe, with Japan, with Korea, with India, with Australia, with Canada, we go from about 25% of world GDP to 50 or 60%. A lot harder for China to ignore. Unfortunately, where we are now is, just as the president seems to be underwater on a lot of issues within the United States, we're underwater around the world. There was a poll out a couple of weeks ago, 130 countries. And what it found was that China was seen as a more credible actor than the United States. Germany, 70% of people in one poll saw the United States as an adversary. So this means that our ability to align, to build convergence in ways that can deal with the challenges that China poses has been vastly diminished. And that's a real challenge going forward.
That's sort of a perfect setup for you, Ambassador. I mean, everybody knows who the ambassador is, but she spent not just time living up in the apartment in New York, engaging with other UN ambassadors, but also decades serving around the world in the Foreign Service. And one of the things about these trips is these countries, to your point, countries around the world are evaluating not just the United States, but also the strength of the leader that you're meeting with. I wonder if you're thinking about how President Xi and other potential partners and some current allies that Tony referenced look at this trip. How do they look at this trip? And how do you kind of repair these relationships and try to rebuild that type of coalition that he was referencing? Secretary Blinken, I'm sorry, I worked with him before. I'll keep calling him the secretary. Go ahead.
I think, am I on? I think the entire world was watching Trump's trip to China. And they were watching, holding their breaths, because they knew that whatever came out of this trip would not be good for them. And so they were waiting to see. I mean, imagine the people of Taiwan and what they are thinking. All of our friends in Russia, in Europe, what they were thinking. And I think even more than anybody, the Russians were watching this very closely. Because when we were in New York, Russia and China were friends without limits. They were the bros. They kept very close connections with each other. Now China has played a very interesting game, and Trump, where now we are talking to the Chinese about things that the Russians might feel uncomfortable about. So we're seeing the pieces of the chessboard moving around in ways that has all the pawns feeling uncomfortable. You know, what is Africa? We're telling Africa, you need to make some choices about what you want to see in your future. And they're being forced into making choices related to China. Because again, I think they find China much more trustworthy as a partner than the United States. How this will boil down, or what it will boil down to in the UN remains to be seen. But I think China's prowess, its power, its leadership on the multilateral stage is increasing.
Senator, part of our objective today is to certainly talk about the path forward. And, you know, in terms of building strength here at home and building these relationships, it requires tough choices at home at times. There has been bipartisan support, for example, of something that the ambassador referenced, which is supporting Taiwan. We don't know where that stands exactly right now. What are the tough choices you think Congress and other leaders need to make over the next couple of years in order to position this relationship in a more constructive way?
Well, one thing that I think was absolutely spot on is talking about strength, talking about credibility that the ambassador and the secretary talked about. But I want to throw one more word into the mix here that I hear a lot from foreign leaders. I had this one leader of an Asian country call me and talk about just the challenges that they see when it comes to U.S., China, and just writ large with foreign policy. And they said to me, I want you to know that when we talk about America, we ask this question, is America a reliable country? And we know the answer to what that is. And so I want to just really throw out that sense of reliability and how important that is and how much we are struggling with it and why we will continue to struggle as a country even after Trump is gone. And this is something that we're going to have to rebuild. So when we're thinking through in Congress, how are we making these trade-offs? We also have to be thinking about the importance of credibility, of reliability in terms of what we're actually able to put forward. Even when we're talking about some of our strategic advantages, for instance, all of us agree that we need to be thinking closely about how our chip manufacturing and other types of AI tools are so critical to the economy of the future. But how are we able to tell other countries what we think they should be doing when it comes to chips or manufacturing equipment if we don't even know what the White House is going to do when it comes to chips to China and elsewhere? You know, when we're talking about, you know, all these different tools at our disposal, you know, the problem is really whether or not we will be consistent with that. And seeing over the course of my time in Congress how Republicans had one tune on China for the past few years and then all of a sudden are absolutely silent right now. I mean, not a single one talking to me about anything that they were concerned about over the past few years. It really just shows how much Trump has captured the Republican Party on China, and we're no longer able to talk about this with the strategy that is necessary for what is the most defining competition of our generation.
Another area where there seems to have been some capturing, shall we say, is on the war with Iran, where there still has not been a war powers vote that has passed. It's come close. You've killed off some people. But let me ask you, Secretary Blinken, right now, I think everybody would like to see this war come to a close. You can certainly tell us how that's going to happen if you know. But what do you see as the impact of what we're looking at right now, both not just with Iran, but in the region and just kind of U.S.'s role in the world 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now?
Well, I think, Jen, we have an example here with Iran of a war of choice that never should have happened, and a war that really sends almost a split screen. You can have tactical success in individual areas and yet have a real strategic failure. And that's where we are. Because at the end of the day, when the dust settles, it's likely that Iran will retain some vestiges of its nuclear program. It will certainly retain a lot of missiles. Apparently, they haven't, in fact, been destroyed. It will retain its regime, and it will have gained this incredible leverage that it didn't have before in the Strait of Hormuz, where it will, one way or another, more or less control what happens there, because it will retain the ability to mess with shipping that's going through. And that means even in a small way, if one guy with a shoulder-fired missile can damage a ship, all of a sudden the ships get scared, the insurers get scared, and you've got a real problem, which means they're going to be in on the deal going forward. That radically changes the region, and it's going to take time to work out from that. You're going to have to find ways over time to work around the hold that Iran will have on the Strait by building more pipelines. Not the best thing, but it's probably the necessary thing to do, especially by focusing on renewables and other ways so that people are not under the thumb of the Iranians, and it really doesn't take much. But it's reshaped it in other ways, too. We've alienated pretty much everyone in doing this. We've alienated the Europeans because we were kicking dirt in their face for 2 years over NATO, over Greenland, over Denmark, you name it. Didn't tell them about this. And then when the going got tough, we said, hey, we need you. And all of a sudden, they weren't so eager to do it. Our partners in Asia, they're the ones who've been on the receiving end of the real brunt of this in terms of the immediate impacts of prices and availability. And in a different way, our partners in the Gulf, who, to Andy's point, have seen how unreliable we are. Unlike the Europeans, unlike our Asia-Pacific partners, some of them would like the United States to, quote unquote, finish the job. That's not happening, so they're frustrated. Others feel like they've now been subjected to Iran's wrath. Iran has fired more missiles and projectiles at the UAE than it's fired at Israel in this conflict. It's radically changed the equation. I think there is an off-ramp, but the president's going to have to decide whether he wants to take it. And the off-ramp involves, guess what? Diplomacy and a compromise. The only 2 times the Iranians have made a deal in the past were to end the war with Iraq that went on for 8 years with 200,000 Iranian dead. The UN came in, offered them a way forward, got the Iraqi troops out of Iran. The only other time, the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal that President Obama negotiated. It took 2.5 years to get it. They were given some things. We got a lot, and we're in a much better place as a result. I think right now, if the president's looking at this, you're going to have some kind of arrangement that maybe downblends some of their highly enriched uranium, probably has a moratorium on enrichment for some period of time. That'd be a good thing. And on the Strait of Hormuz, there'll probably be some kind of tolling system, which no one will want to call by its name, where the proceeds are used for reconstruction of countries in the area that have been damaged. That's a lot to swallow because so much damage done for so little gain.
Is there a scenario, Ambassador, where this war ends and the Iranians don't have some control over the Strait of Hormuz, some financial control? Do you think that's possible?
Honestly, I don't. It'll be difficult to get to. And part of the reason it will be difficult is, again, we're not negotiating with them. Why are we not negotiating with them? We don't have people to do it. We don't have confirmed Senate confirmed ambassadors in over 100 countries. So who is going to negotiate with the Iranians? And I've heard over and over again, Tony, you've dealt with them, that they are extraordinary negotiators. We had extraordinary negotiators. We don't anymore. In Africa, where maybe we want to get some support, 37 countries do not have ambassadors. So the administration is taking the power that it has and dumping it. And so it's in a position where it is not able to negotiate an agreement that would quickly end this war. I think the only thing that will do it, the president will declare victory, which means he has accepted defeat, and move out of the area saying we've accomplished everything we've accomplished when we know that he has not.
Senator Kim, when you just follow some of the headlines, you see kind of war powers vote, war powers vote, war powers vote failing week after week. But there have been some individuals peeled off, I should say, who have voted with Democrats for a War Powers Act, which hasn't happened, I should say, in quite a long time. Give us a sense of where you see things right now in that regard. Are there other ways that you think there is a bipartisan opportunity to hold people in this administration to account over this war?
Well, first of all, I want to say that even the war powers approach, this is the wrong approach that we should have been going down. This is not a situation where we should normalize the idea that a president can start a war on their own, and then it's
very important point. Yes,
and then it's up to Congress later to disapprove of it, right? Yeah. So just from the outset, this is wrong. This is an illegal, unconstitutional war. Now, we are unfortunately in a situation where we do not have three functioning branches of government right now. We have one branch of government that is simply trying to dominate the other two branches of government. I often call Speaker Johnson Secretary Johnson because he acts more like a cabinet secretary than he does as a leader of a separate branch of government. So that's the world that we're in right now. So yes, we're trying to operate with the tools that we can to shine light and draw attention to the American people, who, by the way, fully see this for what it is. You know, when I'm back home in Jersey, I mean, across the political spectrum, nobody likes this war. And they understand just the cost that they are bearing. Over $42 billion more that Americans have spent on gas and diesel since the beginning of this war. You know, that's what we are trying to draw attention to, that drumbeat. So we have to make sure that we're not getting caught up on just the process of, you know, between the different branches of government. This is ultimately about the people. And this is ultimately about the impacts that is having on them, and that this is a choice that this president made, not just to start a war or not, but whether to help American people or not. And that he has clearly made a decision to enrich himself and his family and his friends at the expense of the American people. And they see that so clearly when it comes to Iran.
I'm so glad you took the question in that direction. It was spicy and good. Ambassador, you have spent so much time working in so many parts of the world where there are high levels of corruption, where human rights and that is a key talking point when you sit down with these leaders. When people, let's say in the future, when future ambassadors, future secretaries are going into meetings and they are looking at a past administration that financially benefited to the tune of $1.4 billion, not my numbers that have been widely reported, and more, what impact does that have on the conversations?
It makes us look like hypocrites. It is a very hard conversation to have with a foreign government where you're talking to them about corruption in their country, and they're going to talk back to you about what's happening in your country. I think the only thing that will get us through this, when there's a change of administration, that we hold those people accountable. If we hold them accountable, then we can go to other countries and say, yes, we had this problem, but accountability is important, and this is what we're doing to hold them accountable. Now, will that happen? I don't know, but I would have a hard time having that conversation now with any country because I would feel like a hypocrite, even though I feel strongly that corruption in government is bad. But to try to tell a country that from this side of the Atlantic would be hard.
I want to turn, this is going to seem like a sharp turn, but I don't feel like there's nearly enough attention always on the war in Ukraine because of the war with Iran, because of corruption, because of all the other issues. And Secretary Blinken spent so much time as Secretary of State helping build coalitions, as did the ambassador, of course. If you were to strip away the headlines about Russia, about Ukraine, about military battles, what should people in this room or people watching really understand about the state of things? We're now 4 years into this war.
So, Jen, I think two things. First, it's always good to remember why we got into this in the first place, why we were so determined in our support for Ukraine, because, of course, it was an aggression against a country, and one big country aggressing a smaller country. No one likes to see that, and that tugs on the heartstrings. But there was something else going on. It was an aggression against the very principles at the heart of an international system, no matter how challenged, that really mattered, and mattered in working to keep the peace, working to help countries advance and develop, and principles like sovereignty, like independence, like territorial integrity. That was the goal of the Russian aggression as much as it was to erase Ukraine and subsume it into Russia. And that's why we were so invested in it. But right now, what we've seen is something quite remarkable, which is a country of amazing resilience, a country that now, even with the United States receding in the role that it was playing, is still holding its own. Now, Europe has stepped up in ways that are really, really important, including with funding that is so necessary. But you see the Ukrainians on the battlefield holding their own at horrific cost to them, to their civilians and citizens, also at horrific costs to the people that Putin continues to throw into this meat grinder of his own making. But they are holding on, and more than holding on. They're actually taking the fight to Russia. So I don't think that line is likely to move very much. They're holding their own economically, and they're building a new economy, again, with help from Europe and from others. And the interesting thing is, with their defense industry and what they're doing with drones, they may well wind up at the heart of Europe's future defense industry. They have technology and they have techniques that we don't have. And we see that being spread around the world. And then, step by step, they continue to build their democracy, getting closer to Europe, strengthening the tools. You've seen many people who are in high positions now being challenged on what we were just talking about, corruption. So I think right now, my hope is that the pressure on Putin is such, it's finally catching up with him. He had a reprieve with Iran and being able to sell some oil and the higher prices. But everything else across the board in Russia is really turning. And he's built a war economy that worked for a while, but now is feeding on itself, because basically everything that economy is producing, with everything going into the defense sector, is being eaten up. And it's not productive. It's one thing if you build a weapon system that gets destroyed a few weeks later. It's another thing if you're investing in roads and bridges and technology. So I think we're in a place where if we can help in some fashion the Ukrainians to hang on, it'll get to a place where the line is more or less frozen. And the real measure of success is, can Ukraine stand on its own feet? Militarily, economically, democratically, they're demonstrating that they can do that.
Let me ask you, Senator, to one of the Secretary's points he just made. I mean, Ukraine, it's become sort of a laboratory for intelligence and drones and kind of a different way of warfare. Once we get to a point of past the Secretary of maximum lethality, as I'll just call him, and we're in kind of a future point, what lessons do you think can be taken away from this war? And what do you hope that Congress is applying?
Well, I'll take it in two directions. First and foremost, yes, absolutely. This is showing this new era of warfare that we're in right now. You know, I'm somebody that grew up in the era where we were concerned about weapons of mass destruction. Now we are finding ourselves in a place where we are trying to navigate these weapons of mass production. You know, this idea of what it is when you're able to produce such quantity, whether drones, ballistic missiles, when we have the proliferation of AI, what we see with Mythos and other things like that that are going to completely transform, that is the future. And we do have to be thinking about it both in terms of the warfighter on our side, but also how do you defend against this? And this is why I was also going over, you know, some of our efforts to make sure that we as a nation are ensuring that we are able to do our best to ensure that our adversaries and our competitors like China and Russia are not able to gain some of these tools, whether through AI chips or the means of production to be able to produce those chips. You know, those are the types of things that are going to really determine the stratification of warfare in that way. The last thing I'll just say on this front is I've been very much pushing that we can't just be saying that we're opposed to this might makes right approach of foreign policy of Trump, but trying to devise what is our way forward. And I, for one, believe that that revolves around a singular word, which is resilience. I think we need to focus on an era of resilience in this age of crisis and to be able to mobilize ourselves to shore up our own vulnerabilities, whether that's critical minerals or pharmaceuticals or energy production or any number of other issues, while we are also trying to make sure that we are performing and fighting on the battlefields of our choosing and be able to advance on our strengths. So that's what I think we need to be pushing forward on when we see this incredibly rapidly changing ecosystem that we're in. You know, there's no going back. We need that forward-looking vision and to be able to give a sense of what American credibility and reliability going forward will be based off of.
Okay, we only have 5 minutes left, but we've covered a scope of issues I hope all of you cared a lot about. Let me go to you, Ambassador. One of the things I would say broadly is if I were to give unofficial broad advice to anybody running for office or president, I would say sit down with really smart people and decide what you think about the really tough issues. So let me pose this question to you. What do you hope that people who are aspiring to be sitting in the Oval Office are sitting down and spending time mapping out plans and ideas and thoughts with very smart people with right now?
I hope that they are doing that. And I actually know, I expect that they're sitting down with smart people. But what they really need to do is sit down with the people. They need to get into communities, go into towns, go into capitals, and talk to the people. Because it's ordinary people in places like Louisiana who will be voting for them. And if those people are not hearing from them, nothing that smart people say to them will get them elected.
What do you wish they would be talking about?
Talking about real issues, talking about pocketbook issues, talking about the price of gasoline, talking about their futures, whether their children will have jobs, whether their children will be educated, whether their school boards will be able to pull books like Roots out of the library and stick with it. You know, they want to hear those issues that touch them every day. They don't want to hear the esoteric issues about war and peace, even though those issues have an impact on them. They expect their leaders to know what to do on those issues, but they want their leaders to know what to do to make their lives better.
Secretary Blinken, let me ask you a question in a different way, because you have helped past people running for president think about issues and kind of red team with them what they think, how to talk about it. What would be top of list for you if you were doing that with some candidates right now?
You know, there's so much to think about, to focus on. I guess I'd say a few things. One is, and it echoes what Andy's saying and I think what Linda's saying. There's a lot of understandable nostalgia for the past because we had an American century. We had 80 years where, as a result of the work that previous generations did, we were at the front of the parade and shaping things. And those 80 years, with all of their imperfections, profound as they were, we passed that. And the reality is you can't put the genie back in the bottle. You've got to shape a new bottle. And that's what these conversations have to all be about. We have a pace and scope of change that is moving at speeds unlike anything I ever experienced before in my 30 years in government. And just by way of one example, to get to 50 million users of the telephone back in the day, it took about 75 years. For radio, it took about 45 years. For TV, it took about 20 years. For Instagram, 4 years. For ChatGPT, 4 months. The challenge that anyone in governance has in dealing with that is acute. We have inequalities among countries that have actually decreased, but within them, they've increased, and that has all sorts of repercussions. But finally, and this is what I want to get to, we have a new world order that's being shaped, and grappling with that is going to be the biggest test internationally for future presidents. We have all sorts of emerging actors who are powered, super empowered by technology and by information, and as a result, can either advance or disrupt things in ways that they weren't able to before. And that means if you don't have them on the takeoff, you're probably going to have a crash landing. So as I'm looking forward and I'm thinking about how do you advise a president on how to engage the world? Of course, it starts with our democratic base, and you want strong democracies. I believe that one principle is enduring, and that is enlightened self-interest. The strength and success of others actually redounds to us, and that continues to be important. American engagement and leadership continues to be important. But as we're looking at the way the world is going to be designed, I think increasingly we're going to see alignments of not just countries, but companies and other actors that have a stake in a given issue coming together around that issue. And it's what I used to call variable geometry, different coalitions of different shapes and sizes who are all brought together by a shared interest in a particular issue. Maybe it's dealing with opioids. Maybe it's dealing with food security. Maybe it's dealing with climate. Maybe it's dealing with AI governance. And it won't be a neat autocracy-democracy breakdown or east-west or north-south. It'll be like-mindeds on a given issue, willing to play by the same set of rules. I think a president has to look at that and think about how he or she organizes the country to engage in that. But it starts with, as we've all been discussing, regaining our credibility. And that's going to be the first task.
It's a perfect place to end. I'm very grateful that they are all thinking about these big, difficult issues that I know are on the minds of lots of people here and people watching. Thank you all so much for this panel. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.